Hello everyone. This is the primary tutorial for Hammerhead V2. This tutorial will not cover the things like how to set up a train, how to set up restraints, how to set up gates, um, effects like drive tires, brakes, and so on. Those will be coming in later tutorials, but for the time being, all the information you could ever want to find about V2 is available in this document, which is under the links channel in the Hammerhead server. If you are watching this tutorial and you are not in the Hammerhead server, you will probably have questions. If you have questions, join the server. There's a million resources in there. You can find the link in the description. With that being said, let's begin. So Hammerhead V2 is structured almost completely differently from V1. In V1, you had set zones with certain behaviors. For example, some zone types were stations, normal zones, lifts, brakes, and so on. And those zones could only do a very limited number of things. V2 is set up completely differently. Zones do not have specific types anymore. Instead, zones now have a specific series of instructions they will follow when the train enters the zone. For those of you that have done block coding, or just programming in general, but block coding especially, like programs like Scratch, you will probably find this easier than people that have no coding experience, but don't worry, anybody can do this. It just takes a little practice, but anybody will be able to understand the system. It's significantly more flexible than V1 ever was, and I really look forward to seeing you guys' creations with this. Now let's get started. So the first thing you're obviously going to want to do is install V2. Also, if you currently are trying to set this up on a coaster that runs V1, what I would recommend doing is saving your track, trains, stuff like that, and deleting the rest of the V1 files because they're completely non-compatible with V2, and the V2 installer will just completely overlook them. It won't get rid of them automatically or anything. So you need to get rid of them yourself. Now, let's start with a clean slate for installing V2, and you'll notice I already have my trains and track that'll be covered in a future tutorial. But if you really want to update your trains before then, just go to the documentation, scroll all the way to the bottom, and you'll see all this stuff. Like here, trains will be right here. Anyway, so obviously starting with update scripts. This just installed all these scripts and files for Hammerhead in my game. So I have my folder, all my folders, all my scripts, etc. So now what I'm going to do is, and that's something I need to fix, the next thing I'm going to do now is create a new coaster. So if I go under edit coasters, you'll see that I don't have any coasters right now, and that's because obviously none have been created. This folder is empty right here. So I'm going to start by making a new coaster. Now the name is empty for now, but I'm going to name it Boardwalk Bullet. Now I'm editing Boardwalk Bullet. So you see the files have been made for that. I don't know what that error was that was showing. Didn't seem to make an issue though. Okay. So I can start in a few different places, but I think the easiest place to start will be by setting up the trains and the track first, since I already have these done. So for the trains, I'm going to go to the trains menu here, and this will normally be a list of trains, but I don't have any. So I'm going to start by adding a train, selecting my train model. In here, it'll tell me if the train is okay or not. It looks through a lot of criteria. It might not catch every single issue, but it does a pretty good job vetting your model to make sure that you have selected a valid train. So like if I select the track, it's obviously not going to be a valid train, right? Um, so now that I have my train and the status is acceptable, I can add the train. All right, I've added the train. Here are its settings. We'll come back to this later. There's not much we can do here for now. So now you can see my train popped up here. Now for the track. Same thing. It'll tell you if the track you have is acceptable. And once you click set track, it'll move that model here into the Boardwalk Bullet folder. Okay. I can also look at settings here. I wouldn't touch a lot of these by default. You might choose to. Like here's where you choose your gravity and friction settings, as well if your train is sitting too low in the track. You can raise the up offset. Again, you'll find information about this in the documentation, but I would not recommend touching the orientation offsets. I have those set up to be good for now, so would really not recommend messing with those yourself. Here you can set up your staff permissions. So like let's say I want my panel to only be usable by members of a certain group. I'll go get the group ID and the minimum rank and I put it here. Alternatively, if I have certain teams in game, like let's say I have an operators team, I can say, okay, I want people on this operators team to be able to use this panel. Don't use both of these. Only use one or the other, though. Okay. So now let's start with the zones. So I don't have any for now. Here is a big difference between V2 and V1. At least for now, V2 will not automatically color your zones for you. So the best way to do that is this little plugin that I like, this paint plugin, and I can link it in the description. But the way you use it is you basically just go up here, click whatever color you want, and then you click and drag to paint parts. And that's a really quick way to paint your ride instead of manually selecting every single part, which would be a nightmare to do. So I'm going to get started here by adding a zone. And I'm going to start with my station. Here's my station. You have to click, for all the little string or text inputs you have in Hammerhead, you'll need to click this little button here to basically set them, because pressing enter won't do it. It's a Roblox limitation in plugins. So you need to press this to set whatever value you put in here. So I'm going to add the zone. So now I'm looking at the home page for my station zone. So zones in V2, I mean, of course I said they work differently than V1 because of the action system, but they also have splines and connections, and this is how I did like switch tracks. So basically, your zones have two splines. You have the retracted spline, which is default, and the extended spline. Your spline is just the parts in your zone. So if I'm looking at my station, my spline goes from this part to this part. Pretty simple. Most zones are only going to have a retracted spline, but zones that are switched, or not switch tracks, zones that, sort of like Everest, where like they can go two different ways, those will have different splines. Or like Pantheon, something like that, Icebreaker even. Basically what this means is like, if, and I'll, in the tutorial about switch tracks, I'll explain how to use it, but it just means that this zone might have two different sets of tracks within it. But this zone clearly only has one, it's just a station. And I did not build the transfer track for Boardwalk Bullet. So I'm going to start by setting up this spline. So a good way to scope into models like I just did is holding Alt, then you can select parts inside of models. So as you can see, this is part 70. So this is the start of my spline. Since I only have, oh, I can just do that. Since I only have one spline, I'm going to set this as both my spline 1 and spline 2 start. And then my end here will be part 113. So unlike V1, you don't have to manually type in the values here, you just have to select them, which is pretty cool. But now we have the spline set up. Next, it's time to set up our connections. So again, the reason for this is because if you're using switch tracks or something, your track might not connect to the same piece of track after it moves, like Everest, right? So you basically have to say, okay, in both the retracted and the extended states for this zone here, these are the zones, or basically these are the track segments which it connects to. So for both the retracted spline 1 and extended spline 2 splines, the part before them in this case is going to be this part right here. So just going to set that. And then of course the part after those is going to be this one. So you're basically just telling Hammerhead like where your train is supposed to go after it leaves the zone, or as it comes into it, where it's coming from. Okay, so we have our connections and splines set up. If we were using switch tracks and animated devices, we would go to this menu to set them up. But for now, all we're worried about is the color. So the color for this zone is really red, and that looks right, but I want to verify it. So 25500, I'm going to go here, and I can use RGB and just go 2550. A lot better than the V1 color picker. Okay. So let's start with the sequence for this station here. So I'm going to say, oh, actually first let me describe what cycles are. Cycles are basically the, so think of a Vekoma boomerang, right? With your station on a Vekoma boomerang, your train starts in the station, then it goes backwards up the lift. So that's cycle 1. The first time it was in the station is cycle 1. After it drops off that backwards lift, it's going to re-enter the station. When it re-enters the station, that's cycle 2. So the cycles are basically just each time your train enters a zone before the entire ride sequence is complete and resets. So every zone here is only going to have one cycle, except for the station, which is going to have two. And that's because the train's going to start in the station when the ride starts, that's cycle one. Then it's going to go all the way around the ride and come back into it. And when it comes back into it, that'll be cycle two. So here we'll have cycle one and two. So now I'm inside of cycle one. So I'm going to tell the coaster basically, here are the actions that I want you to do during cycle one. And if you ever want to delete a cycle, just press this button here. So let's say that the train is going to spawn in with its restraints up and the load gates are open. Basically, the train is already parked and it's waiting to start its dispatch process, right? Okay. So the first action I'm going to add is, when you add an action, you'll see it pop up here. Then you click on it to edit its settings. I'm going to change the type of this action to wait. An important note about the wait action in particular, as well as the wait until action, is that these actions will not work if your train is moving. The train must be stopped for these actions to work properly. So now I'm going to click change type. I have two settings now. The first one is ignore in manual. This basically means if my coaster's in manual mode, I don't want it to wait here, which is true. I don't want this to happen. I'm just setting this up for automatic mode, because in manual mode, I want full control over what the train does in the station. I also have seconds, so how long it's going to wait. I'll say 5. Alright, so I have my first action set up. My next action is, because I said the restraints were up and the load gates were open, I'm going to go ahead and close the load gates. So I'm going to go to the gates action. I'm going to change open to false because I want them to close. Load will be true because I said they're the load gates. If I wanted to move the unload gates, I would change this to false. And manual override. This basically means if this attribute is true, this action will happen in manual. Otherwise, this action will only happen in automatic mode, which is how I want it to be. So I'll leave this false. Because in manual mode, I want to be able to use the panel to control my gates, restraints, etc. Okay. Now, action 3 is the restraints. So we'll go ahead and close the restraints. So open will be false. Manual override will remain false because I only want this to happen in automatic mode. Alright. So what else can I do? Let's see. I've closed the gates, I've closed the restraints. I'll probably go ahead and wait like another 5 seconds because nothing's going to happen immediately after this. So I'll do a wait for 5 seconds. And I don't know why this isn't in alphabetical order. It should be. It's a weird Roblox thing keeping it from doing that, and I really don't want to fight with that. Sorry about that. Alright, seconds, 5, ignore manual. True. Because I don't want this to happen in manual. Make sure I did that for the other one. Yeah, I don't want that to happen in manual mode. Okay. So I've waited, and now I'm going to start the dispatch process. But first, I want to make sure the rest of the track is clear for this train, right? Um, so I'm going to add action. I'm going to add a wait until. Jesus. Wait until. So while wait will only wait for a predetermined amount of time, wait until will wait until a specific condition is met. So first, ignore manual. Let's say false, actually. I think I want this to happen in manual because this is going to be my wait before the train advances. So even in manual, if a train's here, I do want it to wait. Okay, so my condition is going to be zones empty. And so there's a bunch of conditions you can choose from. For wait until, don't use probability. That would be bad. Actually, let me change this a little bit. We're going to use custom argument. Now, custom argument is a little weird. It basically lets you, and I'll show you what this looks like. So if I'm going to my zone station, there's a value here called custom argument, and this is how I made Hammerhead compatible with like third-party scripts. Basically, I'm telling this ride to wait until this custom argument value equals whatever I put here, which in this case is going to be dispatch. Let me verify that. So the way to do this is panels. Yeah. So the way the panel works in V2 is when you click the dispatch button, it changes the custom argument value to dispatch. Like, see? So therefore, if I wait until this custom argument is dispatched, I'm waiting until the panel tells me that I can dispatch the train. Um, but I only want this in manual. So I'm going to not ignore this in manual, and I am going to ignore this in automatic, because in automatic, obviously, I don't use the panel here, right? Okay, I've done that. Now let me wait until the zones are clear. Wait until ignore in manual false, ignore in automatic false, condition zones empty. So now I'm saying, okay, are the zones empty? And I don't really have any other zones set up. I'll come back to this. But that's where I would tell it which zones to check. Okay, so we've closed our gates and restraints. We've waited 5 seconds. We've waited until the panel tells us it's okay to dispatch, if applicable. Basically, only we're in manual mode. And now we've said wait until the zones ahead of us are clear. So now we're at the point where the train is ready to dispatch. So we're going to add this action. It's going to be, let's use a sound here. So the way you do sounds in V2, and I'll get into this more in a future tutorial, is you use what's called tags on Roblox. And so you can see, let's look at the speaker here. If you look at this speaker and look at the sound, you'll see under properties you can add tags to it. So like if I added a tag that says parking to this sound, and then I go here and I put parking, I'll ignore it in manual, yeah. In this case, I'm basically saying play sounds with the tag parking, right? Okay. But actually, wait, hold on. I got that wrong. I want to play sounds. That was stupid. I want to play dispatch sounds. So I'll change this sound to have the tag dispatch. And it'll play when I go to dispatch this ride. Okay. So we played the dispatch spiel now. Another thing I want to do is I'm going to set transport speed. This is useful for animated devices only. So if you have animated devices, you can basically at this point change the speed they're going to run at. This is going to be in a separate tutorial though, so I'm not really going to cover it in this main tutorial, but I just wanted to show you where to find it. You can also use brake status to do the same thing. If you look in the documentation and look at the description for these actions in particular, like brake status, you'll see this does not affect train movement. That's because these actions are only for like the visual, or telling the visual devices what to do. So again, I'm just going to ignore that for now. So I'll actually start, let me make sure I haven't missed anything. Yeah, that's everything I really wanted to do here. So I'll use the advance action now, which is kind of hidden. Probably need to fix that. So type will be advance. Alright, so acceleration, we'll give it an acceleration of 15. Has transports, this basically just means, will the coaster only use gravity to propel itself here, or will it be able to push itself along? I want it to be able to push itself along. I know that's not how it works in real life or Boardwalk Bullet, but this doesn't have a downwards tilt. So I'll give it transports, and I'll say the target speed will be 8. So the way actions progress, basically meaning moving to the next action, is a little complicated. So for the advance action specifically, you can see it'll complete when either the front car has left the zone or target speed has been achieved, depending on whether it is the last action. For this is going to be our last action of this cycle. So this action is not going to complete until the front car touches this zone here. The way I can tell it that this is our last action is actually by adding another action and setting its type to change active zone. And zone name, we'll name this one lift to station. So change active zone will almost always be your last action, and that's basically how you're telling Hammerhead, okay, now I'm ready for you to change to the next zone once this action is complete. So because advance is effectively our last action, it's going to advance the train until it gets to this green zone here, and then is going to stop advancing the train. So now, let's set up our next zone. So our next zone is going to be Station 2 Lift. And I want to verify really quickly that I did that correctly. Station 2 Lift. Just want to make sure I got that right, because I got it backwards before. Okay. Alright, so station to lift is going to be a pretty simple zone. It's just going to use gravity to power the train here. So, like before, we can set up our settings first. So my color for this one is 02550. So 02550. And I want to stress this now because I didn't say it earlier. It is of utmost importance that you don't press undo while you're using this plugin, because you'll undo something it did and it'll mess everything up. So do not press Control Z. Just a quick warning. It does mention that on the plugin, but that is a very common error that I've seen with V1. Alright, let's set up our connections now. So only one spline for this track, and there's only going to be one spline for this zone, for every zone on this track here. So I'm going to set before extended and retracted to this part here. And after extended and after retracted to this part here. Now I'm going to set up the spline, so it's going to start here, and it's going to start here, and here, and here. Make sure I got that right. Yep, that's right. Okay. Now our sequence for this one is pretty simple. I want the train to enter it, use gravity until it leaves it. That's literally it. So I am going to go back. Or no, I'm going to go to sequence. Cycle 1, we only have one cycle for this one. And I'm going to add an action. It'll be normal. Normal only has one attribute, that being friction enabled. And I'm actually going to turn it to false for this. The reason for this, the train's front car is going to enter this zone right here, and the rest of the train at that point will be on a flat section. Remember how I said the advance action, the one that was moving our train forward, will stop the second the front car hits this? Well, the effect of that is that the car is basically going to lose its propulsion when it hits this. So if I leave friction enabled on, the car will basically just kind of come to a stop on its own through the train, because it is effectively on a flat surface and it's not moving very quickly by this point. Actually, in that case, I might want to make this also an advance action. Let's say it's true. Acceleration 50. Oops, studio's frozen because it's trying to save. Right. Acceleration 15, target speed 8. Okay. So now because this advance action is not my last action of the zone, it will complete once the train reaches 15 speed. So my next action will be normal. I'm going to turn friction enabled to false though, because I don't know where it's going to happen along this. It could happen when the train's here, in which case it will probably pull itself downwards properly. But if it's still up here somewhere, it might lose all its speed. So I'm going to leave that to false for this zone. And then my next action will be change active zone. And the zone name will be lift. The normal action will always basically have to be the last action of your zone, because it will only complete when the train leaves the zone. It won't complete for any other reason. So now I'm going to make my next zone, lift. So let's start with our settings. The color is 170, 0, 170. Its connections, before and after. And the lift is set up a little weird, as you might notice. I'll explain why I did this later. Spline. It ends at these segments. It starts at this segment here. Okay. So our sequence for this left. I basically want this train to go up the lift slower if there was another train on the layout. Hammerhead V2, as I mentioned earlier, is a pre-recorded system. Since V1 was rendered in real time, it could speed up or slow down a train as necessary while along this lift with no problem, because it was calculating the train's position based off physics and everything in real time. V2 only calculates this in studio and creates a recording that is played back in game, so it doesn't have the ability to be quite as flexible as that. So as a result, I'm going to use a little trickery. So in cycle 1, my first action is actually going to be an if statement. And these are really powerful because you're basically saying if this condition is true, do this. Otherwise, do this. So the condition in this case will be zones occupied. And I don't have the ability to set the zones yet because I haven't made them. But I'm basically going to say if this zone, this zone, this zone, or the break run are occupied, go up slower. So true actions are the actions that will run if this condition is true. Again, the condition is zones occupied. I'm going to set the zones later to these zones. So if any of these zones are occupied, the condition will be true, and it'll run the true actions. So I want the train to move slower here. So I am going to use a lift action, and speed, I'll set it to 5. And that'll be my last change active. Okay. Change active zone. And then I'll change it to lift park. I'm going to put something called this action, or zone here. I'll show you why. Set value. So now I have lift and change active zone. So that's if it's true. If it's false, I want it to go up faster. So action 1 will be lift. It'll go at 8 studs per second. Action 2 will be change active zone. I keep clicking that. I'll change it to lift park. Okay. So I have both my true and false actions done. And that's all I need to do for actions here. Because basically this, and I'll show you what this looks like in properties because it'll make a little more sense when you can see it. So this is my first action. It has two possible ways it can go. So with the station, it's just one long sequence of actions, right? But this has two paths it can basically follow. And the reason I don't need another change active zone action here is because it's not going to, after this action, it's going to go into one of these two paths, right? And both of these paths end with a change active zone action. So if you want to see what that looks like, it's basically like saying, here's the train enters the zone. It's going to follow one of these two paths, and both paths have a, termination point, so it's fine. Whereas, like, if this is the station, it's just going to have one chain of actions that it follows with the termination point. So that's what's happening here. It's like a forking structure. Okay, and I think I said this will be lift park, right? So our next zone will be lift park. So lift park. What I want this zone to do is decide whether or not these zones down here are still occupied. If they are, the train is going to park at the end of this zone and wait until they're no longer occupied. If they aren't, the train will just proceed as normal. So let's start with our settings. So the color is 2550. Oops. Our connections, set those up. Set up our spline. Oops. And now for our sequence. So again, like I said, it's basically going to be if these zones are occupied, park the train, otherwise advance it. So cycle 1, added action. First action is going to be an if statement. So if the condition being zones occupied, and we'll set the zones later because I don't have them made yet, so I can't set them. If it's true, we're going to park the train. So park will stop the train at the end of the zone. And there's quite a few arguments here, or attributes, I should say. Acceleration, all these. I'm going to turn acceleration super high because theoretically the train can roll backwards. In the lift action, the train can't roll backwards. That's the lift. It has anti-rollbacks. But when it's parking, it technically can. So I'm going to throw like an 100 acceleration in here. But my target speed is going to stay the same as it was before, so, and it's saving. So 5. And since my train isn't, speeding up, it won't have a sudden lurch or anything. But this is basically the super high acceleration, which I don't know why I did that, is to keep the train from rolling backwards. And so I just want to verify that that's set properly. Because I literally just released this, so it's very possible there are bugs. No, it did. Okay, so acceleration 100, target speed 5. It's fine. All right. Hysteresis, brake mode, deceleration, all that. You can read about all of that in here. I'm not going to explain all of that, but hysteresis, for those of you that have used No Limits 2, works more or less the same way. It's basically kind of like a cooldown for the brakes, so they're not constantly disengaging and re-engaging. But that shouldn't really be a factor for us here. So target speed, I set that. Brake mode. There's a few brake modes that you can read about. There's 1, 2, and 3. So I basically want the train to... I am going to use brake mode 3. I want the brakes to disengage and re-engage as necessary. Again, we're on a lift, so we're not going to have visual brakes. That's just how the system is going to process the train, basically move it. Hysteresis, I don't know, I'll just use like 1. Doesn't really matter for this specifically. That really matters if you have a downhill brake run where the train is going to accelerate on its own between brake appliances, but that's not the case here. Deceleration, I'll set it to like 10. This is the rate at which the train's going to decelerate, independent of gravity, by the way. It doesn't matter what the gravity is. And then hash transports, true. Because I want transports to move it along this. Okay. So after it parks, I want it to wait until the zones are empty, right? So I'm going to go wait until ignore manual false. Ignore automatic is false, good. Condition, oh, I already said the condition. And argument, I can have all my zones left, so I don't have all my zones set up, so I can't do this yet. So wait until, and then after it's waited, now it can lift the train again. The lift action will complete once the train has left the zone. Pretty sure that's literally the only scenario in which the lift action can complete. Yeah. So add action. Oh my god, I keep clicking that. Lift speed 8, or normal lift speed. So just a quick recap what I did. If these zones are occupied, so the zones ahead of this and the brake run, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna park the train, wait until they're empty, and then I'll proceed lifting the train. After that, change active zone to, I'll call it lift advance. Now let's set up our false actions. So basically, if these zones aren't occupied, I literally just want the train to keep going. So I'm just gonna do lift speed 8, change active zone, and I think I called it lift advance, right? Lift advance, yep, okay. Great, so that's done for the lift park. So this is basically how I'm setting up block zone logic effectively. That's why I had the train wait here until this block was clear, having the train wait here until the next block is clear, and I'm going to do it again at the brake run. It's a little bit of a different way, but you'll see. Okay, so my next zone is going to be lift advance. Now you're probably wondering, why don't I just have the normal zone start here? Like the train's gonna, use gravity at this point, right? And that's how you would do it in V1. But remember, actions end when the train leaves the zone. So the second the front car gets here, the lift zone will stop playing. And if I do that and I have a normal action here, which just uses gravity to move the train will proceed to roll down the lift, and that's not good. So I actually want the lift action to play all the way until I get here. And so lifts are like they are in real life. The train can go faster than your lift speed, but it can't go slower than it. So by this point, if the train starts accelerating on its own, that's fine. I don't care. That's a good thing. But I don't want it to go any slower than that lift. So I'm going to have the end of the lift zone all the way over here, so the train will be pretty sufficiently going downwards by the time it gets to it, right? So there's no chance it'll slow down on its own because of gravity once I get to a normal action with this zone. Okay, So the color for this is 00255. I did HSV. 0, cool. Okay, the connections, let's set those up. Let's set the splines up. Alright, sequence is pretty simple. I'm literally just going to have the train use the lift action until it leaves the zone. So cycle 1, action 1 is lift. Action 2, change active zone. And I'll call that zone normal. That's it, that's it. That's a really simple zone. So again, quick lift recap for those still confused. When the train gets here, it'll decide whether or not it needs to go slowly up the lift or not. When it gets to here, it'll decide whether or not it needs to park here or not. Once it parks, if it does, it'll advance, otherwise it'll just keep rolling through this. And when it hits this zone, it'll advance all the way off the lift. Now for my normal zone. By the way, this screen checks to make sure like your zone isn't a duplicate or something, like duplicate names, because that is an issue. Or it was an issue in V1 that I saw. So make sure you can't do that. But I did not add a check here to make sure that you can't use the same color twice. So make sure you don't do that. And just like V1, remember zones have to be continuous. By that I mean you can't have a zone with another zone in the middle of it, basically. So like this will be, uh, let's pretend this will be, or good example. This is a normal zone. This is also a normal zone. They're two completely different zones. I can't make these both part of the same zone because they have other zones between them. Don't do that. That's probably the most common mistake I've ever seen with the system. Trust me. I've seen a lot of mistakes. That's the most common. Color for this one. 9, 137. I'm doing HSV. 9, 137. What was it? 207. Connections. And saving again. Okay. Whenever it saves, Studio likes to freeze. This is because there's about 500,000 objects in this game, because I have the old recording data stored, and I'll show you what that looks like later. And then the connection after the zone is going to be all the way over here. Okay. Sequence for this one is really simple as well. Cycle 1, again, it's only one cycle for the zone. The train is only going to enter it once ever. But, well, you know, until the ride resets in the station. Add action, normal. I'm not even going to touch this. Friction should be enabled, it's fine. And then action 2 is change active zone. And I'll change it to brakes. That'll be this zone here. Done. For my brakes zone, what I want the train to do when it enters it is stop every time, regardless of whether or not this is occupied up here. And then it's going to wait until this is occupied, or sorry, until this is no longer occupied. And then it's going to advance. So that'll be a little easier than using an if statement, because I just have to use the wait until action for that. So let's add zone, brakes. Settings, color is 17, 17, 17. Connections. And let me set the spline. Alright, for our sequence. Again, I want the train to park, like regardless of whether or not the station is occupied. So park will be my first type. And you have a bunch of attributes here to play with. So acceleration is basically going to be once the train has slowed down, this is the acceleration it's going to use it to move it along the zone if you have transports. I'll set it to 15. Target speed, I want it to slow to 8. This is the speed it'll slow to before it parks. And then what brake mode do I want? Let's see. If I go to park, then I go here, I can read the brake modes. I actually want the brakes to only engage once, slow down to the target speed attribute, and then disengage only, or sorry, and then re-engage only when necessary to stop the train. So I'll use brake mode. Which one? That was 1. Yeah. Deceleration. The train is coming onto this at a very high speed. When you're determining your decelerations, you're going to have to play with it a little bit, but I'm going to use a really high one to start with here. I'm going to use like 90. And this might stop the train too early, but what I really don't want to happen is the train can't slow down in time and it overshoots it. So if I need to lower it later, I can. Hash transport's true. Okay. Action 2 will be wait until. So I'm going to wait until the zones ahead are empty. And I don't want to ignore this in neither manual nor automatic. And I'll set the zones later once I have all my zones created. And then action 3 will be advance. Oops. Use 15. Hash transport's true. I'll move it at 8. And my last action will finally be to change the active zone. And I'll call this one brakes to station. Alright, my brake's done. So now I'm going to make my brakes to station zone. One 63, 162, 165. I'm doing this in a weird way. I don't know why I just did that. Okay. Then now for my sequence, it's just going to be advance. And so, remember I said the advance action will not complete until the train has reached the target speed or left the zone if it's the last action. Well, this is going to be my only action of the zone, so that's fine. 15 hash transports and 8. And then don't forget, you always have to have a change active zone action. Let it go. Here. Station. Okay. Now, my train is going to enter the station basically for the second time this cycle, or this recording loop, right? So it started in the station, now it's coming back to it. So I already have my station set up, so I'm going to go into sequence, and now we're using cycle 2. So I'm going to park the train. What brake mode do I want to use? I want to use 3. So I'll do add action, park. 15, target speed, 8, hysteresis, 2. Probably won't matter. Brake mode 3, acceleration 25, hash transport's true. Alright, so I want it to park, and then I'll have it wait, 3 seconds before doing anything. I don't want to ignore this in manual. Well, yeah, I do. Because I'm going to be doing all the other stuff automatic, or myself in manual, so I'll ignore this in manual. And I want it to wait for 3 seconds. Okay. After that, actually, I forgot something. I want this parking spiel. I'm not going to worry about it. But ideally, I'd make my first action here the parking spiel. Because I want that to play when the train enters the zone. But this is just for demonstration, so I'm not going to go worry about doing that. Alright, so I'm waiting 3 seconds. And then I'm going to open the restraints. So restraints. open, true. Manual override, false. I don't want this to happen in manual. And I want to open the unload gates. So gates, where are you? Gates, open, yep. Load, no. I want it to be unload. Manual override, false. I don't want it to happen in manual. Then I'm going to wait another 5 seconds. This is going to be fast because it's just for testing. Ignore manual true. Seconds, 5. And then I'm going to close the unload gates and open the load gates. Oh my god. So unload gates, close. Load gates open. And I think that'll be the end of my recording, because remember how when we started I said the load gates were open and the restraints were up? Well, now I've set the train to do that. So that should be it for my recording, in which case I'm going to add my final action, which will be end recording. No attributes for that. Literally just says, okay, I'm done with the recording. So that's it for setting up your zones. Although now I need to go back and set all the arguments for the zone entry or the block logic. You'll see. So my little wait until here. That's for dispatch. Zone's empty. So which zones do I want? The zones I want to be empty are station to lift, lift, lift park, and lift advance. Basically meaning I want all these zones to be empty before the train dispatches. Now for my lift, like right here, the condition I have is zones occupied, so it needs to check the zones up here. So the zones that I want to check are, this shouldn't be the case, but lift, lift advance, lift park. I mean, there shouldn't be a train in these theoretically, but just for redundancy's sake, I guess. Normal and brakes. I want all these zones to be clear for the train to proceed at a fast pace. Now for lift park, you're saying if the zones are occupied, park. Right? Yeah. Okay. So the zones in this case will be lift advance, normal, and brake. So basically if these zones are occupied, if any of these zones are occupied, park the train. And also wait until these zones are empty. Yeah. So is it lift advance, normal, brakes? Okay. And my next one should be brakes. So I said wait until the zones are empty. So the zones would be brakes to station and station. I would need to wait until those zones are empty. And that's it. So I believe I've done everything I need to do on this part of the plugin. So I'm going to go to the recording side of things now. So basically, I've told the system what to do with the train. And it's free. Okay, it's saving. All right. So I've told the system what to do with the train. Now I need to record that for it to be able to play back in game. Okay, one thing I did forget to mention is that you need to go to your coaster settings, then go to animation, set segment to the segment you want your train to spawn on. So for me, it'll be 113. Percentage is basically from 0 to 1, or 0 to 100, but in decimal. And it means how far it will be from this part to the next part. So to start off with, use percentage 0, whereas a 1 would be all the way over here, but we don't want that. I would recommend leaving speed at 0. This will be the starting speed of your train. For action, what we need to do is tell the system which action we want to be the first. And so that would be the first action of the first cycle of the station. So I go here to my folder here, cycle 1, action 1, and then select the action and click this button. Now that that's done, we can go to our recorder And loading the animation template should give us our files here. Right, so basically now it's set up I'm not going to go through all this, it's huge. This is the skeleton, quote unquote, that it's going to use for our recording. For the recording, don't do it in this mode of studio in case it messes something up. You need to use it in the run mode. Okay, now that we're in the run mode, reopen your recorder because it likes to do that. And go here, select your coaster. I don't know why it's so big. And we've made our animation template. Now we can click record. This button shouldn't be gray, but it still should work. There's an option here called record in real time where your train will attempt to move in real time, but that'll take longer to record. So there's really no reason to do that unless you really want to see how your ride looks now. But I want to just go fast. So I'll just click record and see how the train starts going really fast. Again, that's because I said don't do it in real time because it is much faster this way. So your train now is going to record every possible scenario you gave it. So you'll notice that it's going to go back in time to calculate all those if statements we said. And again, it's a little jumpy right now, but it's not moving in real time. It's actually just calculating every, I think, 1/30th of a second's worth of movement, which will be played back later in game. In real time, of course. Okay, so the train's about to park in our station. And notice how it immediately teleported back here. That's because it's going back to that first if statement we made. Remember we had an if statement here saying if these zones are occupied, go slower. Well, it has to simulate both possibilities there. So thinking about our branching structure earlier, the entire ride basically looks like this. This is when the train leaves the station, and now it's at a fork. Is it going to go slow up the lift or not? And then from there, is it going to park at the top or not? And then so on. Actually, these will just continue all the way to the end. But we've basically given our ride 4 different possible outcomes, so it has to record all of these. And so that'll take a little while. And there it goes, teleported, and now it's running these. So the more if statements you have, the longer it's going to take to record your ride, which is part of the reason I didn't do one here. I just did a wait until action. Oh yeah, that definitely stopped the train faster than it needed to. A way you can monitor the train's speed in real time is going to replicated storage. Just try to select this folder because it's huge at this point. And then go to your trains, train 1, speed. And here you can view its speed. Since it's not moving in real time, you can't judge it visually, but you can see its actual value here. So for example, I'm going to watch this when the train gets to the brake run because I guarantee it's probably slowing down faster than it needs to. Because I see that in reality, what I could do is just to exit the run mode right now, change the deceleration of the brakes to a lower value, make another animation template, go back into run mode and start the recording again. But again, this is for demonstration purposes, so I really don't need to do all of that. But for your actual rides, that's probably what you'll want to do. Another note, I forgot to mention this, or I think I might have, but just mentioning again, acceleration and deceleration of zones, especially deceleration when it comes to parking, is not impacted by gravity. So when you're deciding the deceleration your train needs, let's see. Oh yeah, it gets slowed down by here. Okay. When determining the deceleration for your like brake zones and whatnot, you don't need to factor in gravity. It'll ignore it. All right. Also, you'll notice my recording is skipping the weights. I probably should have had like a wait 3 seconds there too. Um, it's skipping the wait actions because there's no need to record that. Okay, my recording is now done. So now I have an absolutely massive animation folder. And by massive, I mean that like it's going to go on forever. And some of these keyframe folders are going to have like 200,000 keyframes inside of them. So what I need to do now, this is very important. Select this folder. Your studio will just start running pretty badly. Press Control C. You must verify this folder's been copied. It's actually frozen my studio, so I know it's copying. Alright, my studio unfroze. So now that I'm sure I've copied this folder, I'm going to exit run mode and go back into the normal studio mode. Okay, so I'm going to delete this old animation folder. This is the one that has no keyframes inside of it. And now I'm going to press Control Shift V to paste my new folder in, which is going to take a minute here. Okay, Now my animation folder is in, and I need to deselect it because it's killing my studio. Okay, one more thing I need to do is now I need to tell my trains where they need to start. So I've went ahead and added another train. So I'm going to look at my trains here. Train 1, I want to start at the very first action. So like the beginning of our coaster. That was our wait action right here. So the folder above that is animation. And the keyframe folder right here, I'm going to select keyframe 1 as my starting keyframe. Percentage should be 0 and speed should be 0 as well, unless you're doing something weird. And do note that your starting action for trains has to have a keyframe folder. Some actions, like gates, don't have keyframes. Notice how there's no keyframes folder here. So you can't do that. I want my other train to start at the brake run, waiting for the station to clear. And so I could either go and try to find that manually, or I could just type brakes, wait until. It's always going to be the name of the zone underscore the name of, or the type of the action. So there's 4 here, because remember how the ride branched out in 4 because of those if statements. There's like 4 possible paths this ride can follow. Just choose one, it doesn't matter for this case. And so my second train, I'll start here. So the action folder would be this action here, so next. And the keyframe folder will be keyframe 1 here. Cool. And again, percentage 0, speed 0. And now that I do this, I'll publish the game. And when I join it, it should hopefully work. Alright. Now finally you join your ride, and if everything went well, it should have worked. Yep, there it goes. So what just happened is, this will normally happen when you join. It resynced. This basically meant the trains that I saw on my client were not synced up with the trains on the server. That was a common issue with V1, but V2, as you just saw, will correct for that. So anyway, this train waited until the train parked. Its restraints were lifting. This train got to here, decided these zones were empty, so it's going to progress. This train's going to sit here now. Alright, it should be able to dispatch now. Yeah, there it goes. Notice that it's not high enough. I should raise the up offset in the settings to correct for that. And this train is going to go up slower. So now it's going up slower than this train was because this zone is occupied. And remember how we had that if statement earlier there that said, oh yeah, if the zone's occupied, go up slower? That's exactly what it's doing. And based off the fact that this train isn't going to clear the brake run in time, it's now going to park. Alright, so that ends the tutorial. Remember, I have more tutorials that'll be coming out on animated devices, setting up trains, restraints, skates, how to use the panel, all of that. But this was just a general recap of how to set up the system, so remember, if you have any questions, join the Discord server, there's plenty of resources in there, and don't forget to read the documentation as you do this. It is incredibly informative and has almost all the information you could need. See ya, guys.